به سینما رکس گوش میکنید. پادکست در مورد فیلم های ایرانی. اپیزود 38.
Cover, it's an English podcast.
You're such a hater. Episode 38. Dariush Mehrjui's Hamoun. Welcome back, Mehrtash June.
Welcome
Mehrtash
back,
Mohit,
welcome back, welcome
prolific
back.
director, known for working on some fantastic shorts, but his upcoming feature is going to be his greatest masterpiece ever.
Yeah, of course.
Which we are in production right now. We're in pre-production.
It's the greatest masterpiece because it's written by
There we go.
just Mohit, who's the greatest writer of all time. That's why. So, yeah, I'm excited for it, and I'm excited for this. Thank you guys for having me back.
Welcome back.
Thank you very much. Your show is one of the more popular ones amongst the intellectually what's the word?
Intelligentsia.
Intelligentsia. That's the word I'm looking for. People really liked your assessment of what film were you on? Actually, it was the last Mehrjui film we did.
Yeah, it was Gov. It was Cow. Yeah. Thank you. I mean, I'm glad to hear that. I enjoyed it. a lot. Just rewatching it and like kind of doing the research for it, and it was really fun.
The last time we'd done this, Mehrjui had just been murdered senselessly, and I remember we'd sort of scrambled to bump up the episode on Cow we were gonna do.
Yeah.
And so it was like under tragic circumstances, still tragic loss over a year later. But Dur Bar Shoma Dustan Aziz, this is the Cinerex podcast where we discuss all things Iranian film, cinema, television, divorce, marriage,
rifles,
flashbacks, dream sequences,
car crashes,
the devil. I'm Kaveh Mohebi.
And I'm Farhan Moradi.
And with us today is, as we've discussed in intro already, is
Mehrtash Mohit. Or as we say it in Farsi, Mehrtash Mohit.
Welcome to the show.
The thing about you said after the episode, we had like when you come on for a future episode, what do you want to do? And you specifically said you want to do this film, which is what?
Which is Hamoun by Dariush Mehrjui, one of the most influential directors and writers of Iranian cinema.
Is he your favorite out of those, like that generation of Iranian directors?
I mean, you gotta define the generation. I don't think in that if you're talking about like Kimiyai, Mehrjui, Beizai, and I would say Beizai is my favorite, but Mehrjui is. I can't really choose, to be honest with you. I think they all have they were all influenced by the same era, and they tried new things together, and they were just the thing is they were all also hung out together, and they all had share of ideas. So
what is it about Hamoun that why does this film mean so much to you?
It's a cult, like if you can ever say a cult classic film of Iranian cinema, I would say this is it. So why does it mean so much to me? It's the things that we're going to explore a bit more in this session that kind of come up to me.
Yeah.
It goes back to my childhood, people that I respected like growing up, the people just watching and want to be influenced by them. They were all talking about this film.
Right.
It was a special film, at least what I was hearing growing up. And then you start watching it, and as a kid, you don't necessarily know why it's a special film. And then you keep watching it again as you grow older a bit, and then you hear it, and then you watch it again with your friends, and they all have different ideas and different things to say about it. So it holds a special place because of all the sentiments around it as a society.
Okay, that's interesting.
How old were you the last time you watched it?
I think the last time was when I was in Iran. I think probably 18 or 19. I think it was when Khosrow Shakibai died, which was very tragic. I think he was one of the best actors ever lived in Iranian cinema.
That's the lead actor of this film.
That's the lead actor, yeah.
I didn't know how did he die?
He was young.
Yeah, he was young. He unfortunately he got addicted to different things. He never came out, but he was just not in good health. I think eventually he had lung cancer, or he was not in good health, unfortunately, and he got addicted to drugs and passed away. He was one of the most influential people in Iranian society at the time. He was in very popular TV shows. He was in almost every popular movies ever made. He was there, and his voice was very unique. So he did a lot of audiobooks back in the time when no one was doing audiobooks really, and he did a lot of poetry readings. And he was just a great actor.
There was another actor too. Who am I thinking of? I did this for another episode of podcast.
Downpour.
In Downpour, yeah, the lead actor of Downpour.
Yeah.
Similar thing, right?
Yeah.
He was even younger.
Like a heroin addict
he was a heroin addict. They used to call him like Not James Dean, but like he was an incredible actor, but he died
Yeah.
much
Yeah.
younger, so he didn't really get a chance. Like after Revolution, I think he died very quickly. He didn't really do a lot of movies after the Revolution. Khosrow Shakibai came up after the Revolution, really. He wasn't really
I see. Yeah. Okay.
in the film Farsi era that much.
Yeah. Because I remember in that thing, and I researched that Bezai had described Parviz Fanizadeh.
Fanizadeh, Parviz Fanizadeh.
Right, yeah. Bezai had described him as like the greatest living Iranian actor, and had he not died, he thought he would have been like the most prolific Iranian actor of all time.
Yeah.
Bezai
Yeah, I
said
think
that about him.
it's 100% true. I mean, if Bezai says it, like, I mean, who? Yeah, he knows. Yeah, he's incredible. He was one of a kind.
Okay, I'm gonna dive in with a quick plot summary, and then we'll take it from there. Dariush Mehrjui's Hamoun. Hamid Hamoun, an intellectual and aspiring writer in Iran, struggles to cope when his wife, Masjid, a budding abstract painter, demands a divorce after 7 years of marriage. Once deeply in love, Masjid now sees Hamoun as a stifling force against her pursuit of a meaningful life, leaving him devastated and grappling with unfulfilled dreams. Told through a series of flashbacks and dreamlike sequences, Hamoun's story unfolds through a mix of reality and the surreal, as Hamoun confronts his emotional turmoil. It has no critical score, and it has an audience score, which is now called the popcorn meter, of 88%. So I ask you, Mehrtash, Mohit, what do you think of Hamoun?
I think as a concept and as an achievement of ideas and thoughts into a movie and kind of have a coherent and a watchable movie, I think it's good. But do I enjoy it as a film that like I just want to put on to watch a good film? Not necessarily. I don't know, if I'm hitting my mid 40s and I have a lot of questions about what the is going on with my life and why do I feel so sad, I'm pretty sure I would put it on and have a lot of answers.
I just have a quick follow-up question for that. Because I feel like I can interpret what you said in two ways. The first thing you said was you were like, it's a competent movie. So because it's a movie, sure. But is it something that I would just put on? Not necessarily. Are you saying that because you were disappointed watching this now versus when you were 18? Or are you saying that because it's just like the themes are very heavy and like depressing?
No, I don't think the themes are heavy or depressing. I think as a film itself, I think since 18 till now, I've also been more involved in film, made my films, and like taste maybe change.
Yeah.
I think it's not an accessible movie for a general audience, and it's something that I've come to kind of appreciate about. If you want to make intellectual films, if you want to make thought-provoking films, you don't necessarily need to be very dense and heavy in your philosophical approaches.
Yeah.
Even though I don't think this film is that. I don't think this film is like comes across as like sanctimonious or like trying to, look down on the audience. I don't think it's trying to do that, but I think it is very dense for general public, which I think we're going to get into, because after that I went to Letterboxd and kind of looked at the reviews of the general public, and it is one of those movies that it's either people hate it or people really love it. And once you get into that, the reason for the hate is people just didn't have the time or energy, the interest to look into all the metaphors and the symbolism and all the issues that he's trying to talk about, and just looking at the surface, and what this movie is. And then the other side of the coin is a lot of people who they're just generally interested in like films with a lot of metaphors and a lot of symbolism behind it. They really love it, and they like, it's like reading a book, right? It's like you look at it and every little scene is very, very, very well thought out. You see that in the movie in different scenes when you have books, like every little book that you might even not eat, because this movie talks a lot about books, and I think
there's
it's something
so
we're
many
get into. But there's so many of them that just like there in one little corner, he doesn't really even talk about them, or you see them. If you really pay attention, you see them. So that's very well thought out. Nothing is accidental. He's really knows how to put them there. And it's a filmmaker that I think is growing as well at a time from how to come to make different character-driven films versus like story-driven films. Like this is an era when he just became like a character-driven film, and then after that he made a trilogy of films. It's an effort that he did, and I think it's still a very good film. But I mean, it's a hard question to answer. Do I like it? Yes, I think I still really like it. I still love it, especially the acting. I think is one of the best actings you could watch. But is it an enjoyable movie if I want to put it on for like with my friends, be like, yo, this is the Iranian film that you need to watch, and this is like that movie that will introduce you to Iranian cinema and everything about it? No, I don't think it's there. I think he's really trying to be like, you can see the influence of Ingmar Bergman on him, you can see the influence of Fellini on him, like
Fellini,
it's all there.
I've been recommended this film by two people, you and another friend, Arash Ashtiani, who we've had on the show. He's the director who's also the actor in Holy Spider. Both of you guys are like deep lovers of cinema and also incredibly intellectual people. And after seeing this movie, I realized why it's such a high recommendation, because although I liked the film, and we'll get to it as we dig deeper, I realized watching it as I finished the film, this is a film that I will probably like more on second viewing. And something that demands research and like paying attention. And you have to have a sense of like general knowledge on not just philosophy, but spirituality, humanism, different theories, like a good literacy knowledge
Iranian
of like
literature,
Eastern and Western books. And it is not accessible for like the average person. My mom, she watches for her first time actually, because she didn't watch a lot of Iranian movies after leaving Iran, like in post-revolution. So she's seen this for her first time, and I watched it with her, and she really liked it. But she was like, was this film accessible to the average Iranian citizen living at this time?
Think about when it came out, right? The thing that I found so fascinating about this film is that it felt like commentary on this wave of intellectuals and intelligentsia in like the late 70s and early 80s in Iran, right? Like going into the revolution, there's all these people who were highly educated people, right? Not just academically, but then also extracurricularly. People were consuming tons of books on philosophy, spirituality, and comparing notes and books and having these discussions late at night. Like these were the people who were like at the forefront of the revolution, right? And then all of a sudden, over the next 10 years, they noticed that what we tried to build with the revolution did not, like, it wasn't what we wanted it to be.
Yeah,
exactly.
Whether that be because they were lied to, or they like squandered it, or it was, there was a power vacuum, whatever, carried away. Right. And so this movie is like totally commentary on this generation of men who saw themselves as like the saviors, the protectors, the intelligentsia. And now it's like their lives are falling to shit. Everything's falling apart. Nothing is the way that they wanted it to be. The women are
unsatisfied.
They're like depressed. They're trying to leave and they can't. Men are still holding it over them. I think the reason that this would have resonated is because the target audience were people like the main character, and there were a lot of them in Iran at the time.
But it was a criticism of them. It's a scathing criticism of them, too.
Yeah, it's a self-portrait of criticism of them. And I think at the time, everyone in that era, in the intellectual era, they were feeling that way. They were criticizing themselves. They were like, what did we do? Where did we go wrong? We thought we knew all of it, but then nothing all at the end makes sense. And then you have a daring...
we thought we had all the answers.
Yeah, and a daring person comes along, not a daring, but like a reflective filmmaker comes along and like writes about it. And he's like, yeah, we read all these books. We thought we had all the answers from Western, Eastern literature, thoughts and ideologies.
Yeah.
And now look at it. 10 years has gone. Nothing makes sense. Women are... And it is very self-critical of men as well, right?
Yeah.
Which I'm gonna tap into what people are now like later on saying about it, but it's very openly critical of men and the society and what went wrong, and it's this, they don't understand it, and as intellectuals, you can, what else is there to do if you are reading all the books and if you're thinking all about everything and you're reading Kierkegaard and you're reading, Attar, like all of the things that there is to do, but then you still don't understand it. You still, the things are still fucked. What else to do rather than just kind of go insane?
It's like a modern comparison to this might be like if somebody today made a movie about like an intellectual Democrat who's incredibly left-leaning and thinks that they're very open-minded and liberal, and they're looking at like Trump taking over, like, how did this all go wrong? We're all Clinton supporters and we're all Joe Biden supporters and we all read all these philosophical books. How could this have happened to us? We're such smart intellectual people, and it's like you're like missing. You know what I mean? Like that could be an equivalent of what it would be like there. The film. You're not agreeing? No?
Yeah, and
No?
I agree, and I think that's the hint. What Farham pointed out well is like hint on his like his is like classical. It's cultist status, right? Because at the time everybody was like that. Like at the time everybody who either was like that or wanted to be like that. It was like because a small group of people made the revolution really happen, and the leaders were all these kind of people with ideologies and the things they know better, and like we need to change. And then it's 10 years gone, and people are questioning everything, and then you're still allowed to kind of make these kind of films because it's only 10 years into the revolution. It's not so the hammer is not coming down as strong as it is right now, or like 20 years after the revolution. So you can still talk about it, you still can make these things. And this guy is kind of looking back at all of those people and themselves, be like, listen, we nothing makes sense anymore, and we kind of fucked up, and we need to talk about it, and not necessarily even talk about it, try to make sense out of it, which I don't think even at the end he does. That one side of it though, I think, but there still is a lot of personal reflections in the film as well, right?
Oh, for sure.
At that age, at the midlife, really looking into different aspects of his life, being interested. He's a major in philosophy, right? Mehrjui majored in philosophy and cinema from UCLA and then came back to Iran. So he is already interested. He has already those ideas in his brain, and then he comes to a society that goes through revolution and big changes happen. It's like, it's almost like a heavenish society for an intellectual who comes back from a philosophy major of America and goes back to Iran and then goes through a revolution and like has all these intellectuals around him. It's like, what else did you want more, right?
This movie's an interesting, like it captures an interesting transitionary period in Iranian society, because prior to the war, obviously, like you're looking at footage of the revolution and there's just like thousands and thousands and thousands of people in the streets pushing hard for a revolution. You look at footage of Iran now, and the masses are pushing for an end to this regime, right? So it's like at some point there has to have been a flip in society where people went, we want this revolution, we want to see an end to this, blah 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 blah, and then to the population being like, actually, we want an end to this government too, right? And this movie, I think, serves as a really good transitionary period where it's like that group of people is stopping and going, hey, wait a second, I think we screwed up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's getting deeper into that like political side of or sociological aspect of why and how it happened.
Yeah.
But I think within the group of intellectuals, because the revolution, like it's a bigger topic, and like why the masses followed it and everything. But within that group of intellectuals, I think so. But we can never also, I don't think we can, it's there, I see it, I feel it, but whether it's how much of this is influenced by his personal struggles and then sociological influences that he was also feeling, or was it influenced by the change and the heartbreak that he felt because of the revolution, and then his personal things also added to it, and then he make it. So I don't know. But all it does, it works very well for both sides. Like I watch it, I'm like, this is a very good metaphors of all the things that are going through. And at the same time, it's like, yeah, I'm pretty sure if I watch this in my, near my 50s and early mid 40s, I'd be like, yeah, a lot of this resonates. Like,
right.
What's happening with my life?
I think that's kind of what I was saying that my mom was referring to. It wasn't saying that it wasn't commenting on anything. Like, it was just saying, like, who was this film for? How did the people respond to it?
Right, yeah.
Like in the late 80s, in a time in Iran, she was just curious as to how the response was.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a French New Waves. You had a certain group of filmmakers who kind of dominated the culture, right? And then they dominated the political spectrum in the same group. Like you have filmmakers, painters, but the filmmakers at a time as well. Like society is influenced by these intellectuals. So like if they're making this and everybody's writing about it, people are like, okay, so this is what we're going to talk about. And it honestly makes society a bit more smart. I don't want to say smarter, but like it makes them think a bit more. And that's why you can say like Iranian society is just generally more political aware, and like the conversations, the taxis, they're always about like political issues and societal issues and all that stuff. So it is because of these people who kind of came from abroad, started like bringing up Western ideas and combine it with their Eastern cultures and traditions and make new things that make people think. Whether you were get it and interested about it, maybe the masses weren't, but they still knew that it's something they need to watch and talk about.
I wanted to also write a note I had made based on the stuff I'd read afterwards too. I wrote, what happens when a dream is over and one is forced to live a difficult life? An Iranian film about the midlife crisis of a self-absorbed man who can't accept or understand why his wife wants to divorce him. And I said, Hamoun's refusal to accept reality or grant Mehrjui a divorce is both character study, metaphor, and criticism of modern urban life in Iran.
Yeah.
Okay, so funny enough, I actually thought I was watching the wrong movie multiple times because of how different this is from a movie like The Cow, right? Like, the pacing is totally different. The dialogue is different. Like, even the cinematography, where I found the cinematography in The Cow was beautiful, and every single still in that movie, you could like print it and like on a canvas and put it up in your room. I found this movie was really hard for me to get into at first because the cinematography first and foremost was not very good in this. Like, I thought it looked like it was like it had like the budget or the shooting style of like a TV show or like a TV movie. The music is like definitely a product of the times. It's like that like 80s, 90s cheap like synth keyboard style score. That really made it hard for me to get into. And then how unlikable the main character is as well. Like, all these things just kind of layered on top of each other. I was like, frick, I'm really not enjoying this movie. As the movie went on, I was able to kind of forgive some of those things and look past it. And then I was able to be a lot more forgiving of the fact that, like, yeah, this isn't an intentionally unlikable main character. So I think just like some of the way that the movie was wrapped and presented does a disservice to the movie and doesn't age very well. And maybe that also lends a little bit to why, like, rewatching this now versus when you were 18 might not be the same. Also, a lot of the dialogue I found was like sometimes a little too wordy, whereas like in The Cow, the dialogue was much more stripped back. And so like sometimes someone would say something and then they would just leave it with you and you would have to like piece it together. You know what I mean? But here, there'd be like, he would have to give a very specific example. He asks his mentor about Abraham and his son, Ishmael, about the sacrifice. The mentor gives him a response. Then later in the movie, he brings it up again to his in-laws and his relatives, and it turns into like a 10-minute discussion. And I'm like, I didn't need the 10-minute discussion one. You bringing it up to your mentor and then just like ruminating on it is enough for me to be able to like, for it to like sit with me. I can like marinate in it. I can think about it. Like, that's enough. I didn't need the dialogue to keep like talking about the same thing over and over and over. So like, I think there's a good movie in here. I just think there's a lot that needs to be trimmed off the edges.
I have a lot to say about that. I think it's part of the movie, all of those repetition of those confusions, because he's confused about all of that, right? He's going through all of that. So it's like every time that he's reflecting all of those, it's a main theme of the movie about different ideologies and different philosophies that he's trying to find answers to, right? Mm-hmm. Existentialism, the idea of like Kierkegaard, and then you have the idea of like, when which again Kierkegaard I think talks about it as well. It's like how Ismail and like how Ibrahim was like willing to kill his own son. It's like the whole meaning of fate is that, and then but it's not really.
It's like, if you love someone, why would you sacrifice it? Why would you let them go?
And then he goes and he tries to find answers in religion as his childhood, when you watch those sequences when he's a kid and he goes through this very violent,
they slaughter a lamb in front of him.
Ashura, the Ashura scene.
Yeah, and people like hitting themselves, blood is coming, and then that's beautiful shot when he's just standing in front of this alam, which is this big monument. I think it's a symbol of what Imam Hussein was going through, and then one person carries that on their shoulder, and then you see that one big white shot when this kid is standing in front of it and feeling so small and kind of feel dominated and threatened. So it's all of those ideas, and then he tries to find answers in his own philosophy. So I think it's kind of justified for me that the way he talks about it all the time, and that's why it makes this movie a little bit inaccessible for a lot of people.
Do you think, Mehrtash, there's something also to be said about, and I think if I'm correct in this assessment, I think it's a really interesting thing he does, where like Hamoun is a man who he's like working on his thesis and it's like on Sufism and he's like reading all these philosophical books and he's like quoting poetry whenever he talks. But then at the end of the day, he's just like this pig-headed, stubborn guy with a short temper who yells at his wife and hits his wife. And it's like, there's such hypocrisy in that. Like this guy wants to just talk about Sufism and talk about poetry and love and all this stuff, you know, but like he's not this guy at all. Like he's just such a short-tempered kind of like guy who's like quoting these intellectual ideas, but then like pretty rotten to his wife. Did you not think there's an element to that?
I think so. I think it's telling that for a purpose.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's purposeful. I think one critic was talking about it and like wrote this huge article and how his friend Ali Abedini, who he really hard research his mentor, he's the epiphany of someone who's given up and he's fully dedicated himself to his belief and his Sufism and he's let go of life.
Yeah.
And he's just living based on his beliefs and ideas. He's just working for the sake of work. He doesn't really need money. He actually, we hear that dialogue. Well, he is what happens when you have those beliefs, but then you still are confused or chasing idea of modernism and idea of living a life to normalcy. What happens to you? Can you really have that? Is it still matched with the way that we want to live? And the answer is kind of not, right? There's also the question, did he really marry her for money? Which is not, probably, but some of it. He wanted like a good life, a good wife, a beautiful wife, you know, but also it's like, I'm also living by this, all this. You can have it all in a way, right? But his lawyer, like, "Pato az gilimet daraz kardi." You just kind of disarrayed from your path and you thought you can have it, but then you thought you can have the money and the beautiful girl, but look at you. No, you can't. So, and now you got to kind of come back and live the life that you want.
Opening scene, it starts in a dream, and I find that really interesting that it's like, at first I was like, the first note, I'm like, what book is he holding? But that was the Fear and Trembling book by Kierkegaard. He's holding that book, and they're watching themselves on a movie screen up on a hill.
Yeah.
And then he's got this bride who's his wife, and then like the devil comes and like takes his bride away.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It's starting with some like heavy spiritual and intellectual and philosophical things right off the bat. So you got Kierkegaard in the book, them watching themselves on a movie screen, surrounded by little people and friends and strangers, and his wife in a bridal gown, and the devil taking the bride away.
So basically, that sequence, I think, summarizes the whole movie right at the beginning.
Yeah,
You don't really need to watch the rest. It's like, this is it.
Watch the first 3 minutes. Yeah. But then also, here are some of the books I made note of, because I had also a version with subtitles that I was watching alongside for some sections. But one of the books said it was called like Abraham on Fire or Abraham in the Furnace or something like that. Asian Facing West.
That's an important book. Yeah, that's by Shaigan. That's a very important book that's like really influenced the intellectuals at the time.
Another one is obviously Franny and Zoe by J.D. Salinger.
Yeah.
Which we'll talk all about in deeper analysis. Zen, he mentioned Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which I was in a book club during COVID and we read that book.
Yeah.
Carl Jung's writings, a book on Carl Jung's philosophical writings. Fear and Trembling by Kierkegaard. Those were like the 6 books I just made notes of, and I think there's a whole bunch more.
There's there's like
also
Herzog. There's book Fear and Trembling you mentioned. Blind Owl by Hedayat. What were the other ones? There was like all those ones that I sent you to, Kaveh.
Pascaratur Olia is there, which is by Attar Neshaburi, which is one of the most
like a huge Iranian Sufi philosopher.
And he was very much existentialist in a way. Back in the time when Islam hit Iran, he was like the one who's like live life and just enjoy every moment. He talks a lot about different philosophies back then, and he's very also endeared by a lot of intellectuals in Iran. Even the new generation is kind of obsessed by it.
So it's just really him laying it all out of like, here's all the books I read and I know, and I'm going to insert them, and I'm going to make references and metaphors and allegories. So you better read up on all these books before you see this movie to catch all the references.
Yeah.
It's really impressive, but also it's a daunting task to fully comprehend every nook and cranny of this film.
Do you think it's necessary?
It's not necessary, but I'm sure. No, it's not. Of course, it's not necessary, but it's obviously supplemental reading.
No. I don't mean to read it. I'm saying, do you think it was necessary for him to like make reference to like this entire library's worth of work in this one movie.
Probably. I mean,
Yeah,
I think
he wants to say, like, listen, this is what I'm trying to say. Like, I've based on all of these. It's not just my ideas. I'm trying to make sense of everything I've read. And that's why, it's, again, I said at the beginning, it doesn't really makes it accessible for the masses, and also, like, not an enjoyable film to watch, because you're watching a philosophy lesson, really. You're just like, okay, now this is what's then, and you can have a snippets of all of these ideas, and then you get into.
Okay, my question for you, and you might know this. I couldn't find this at all in my research. Was he going through a divorce when he made this movie? Because I would be shocked if he wasn't. Like, it almost feels like he must have been trying to deal with something going on in his real life.
That's a good question. I think so. I can't answer for sure, but I think so. Maybe.
Doesn't
I mean,
this
it
feel like
should
a
make
director
sense.
who's like trying to work out shit going on in his own life?
For
through
sure.
film?
For sure. I think it must have.
Can I also put, I just want to point out for our reaction, I forgot to mention how great it was that we had a reunion with Etizola Intizami, who was
I had the same thought.
who's the guy who's falls in love with the cow.
Yeah.
Not falls in love, turns into a
Yeah.
cow. That's him aged up a few years, like a few decades there. And any other main thoughts or our reaction before we move on? I mentioned that, like, it's very much, and I saw this was echoed everywhere else too. It reminded me of 8.5. We referenced it's very Fellini, but some critics called him essentially the Fellini of Iran.
Yeah.
And that this is Iran's 8.5.
I'm going to go back because Shaigan, one of the books, I think it's a very good point too. Because the book that you mentioned, what was the name of the book?
Asia Facing West.
Asia Facing West. So it's that the idea of that is Iran and Persia was the very first powerful civilization in Asia who made contact with the powerful nation of the West, which was the Greek, right? And it talks about how during all of these times, Iranians and the culture, they try to be attached to the West, but they don't want to get involved with the West too much because they don't want to get rid of, and they don't want to forget their own traditions and ideas and philosophies there. It's like we are also like obsessed with the ideas of the West, but also we think all of the miseries that we face is because of the West, and all the answers that we have is very good. And I think that's what basically fascinates me in terms of how Iranian intellectuals and cultures were fascinated by the West. And at the time in the 70s and the 60s, where the West was like the French cinema and Italian cinema, really, right? The French cinema.
Yeah.
So you get those ideas, you bring them in, but you also like kind of try to make it your own and reject some of the ideas and talk about it, which makes an Iranian's society and kind of art culture fascinating one, because they like the West ideas, but they don't want to be fully associated with them. They don't want to forget who they are, but also they think the West is bad, but also they love the West. And that book is like, honestly, is kind of answers this whole question.
Who wrote the book again?
Shaigan, I forgot his name. His first name is Dariush Shaigan or something.
I just wanted to add also, I wasn't anticipating a samurai sword fight dream sequence
Yeah.
in the middle of the
I know,
movie, which I actually thought was kind of great.
I thought all the little like dream sequence things, like when he's like hallucinating, the dream sequences, the flashbacks, I really liked all that stuff with the movie. And I thought to me that like that was almost more thought provoking for me than like watching this guy like give a philosophical monologue for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I would have preferred like drop a couple little tidbits and then show this stuff. And because that stuff I thought was where the movie like did something really interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's trying to be Bergman, like the way that he really talks about these philosophies. But Bergman is still a very entertaining, and there's a storyline, and you watch it, and there's philosophical ideas are kind of hidden in the theme and the whole thing that you're going through. And it takes one idea and talks about it and tries to answer it. Or Tarkovsky, the other way around. Like he just like really hammers down on the philosophical aspect, and he kind of make a boring film in my views, but it's also beautiful and gorgeous. And these guys are all influenced. So he's trying to do all of that. But I think he just packs it up with so many ideas and so many things, and a little bit too much I don't know. I think
you're right.
film needs to be watched again and again. But also, if this was his style, it would continue to kind of like make it, polish it, and make it his own, style of filmmaking. I think he would have make it get to where you were saying, when makes one idea and then makes an amazing film out of it that you just come out and like keep thinking about those ideas, like Bergman in my view. But Here, he just throws them out there and he tries to answers for himself.
The last thing I'll say is I also wrote it's a criticism of the inability by intellectuals to actually get anything done, making things worse along the way. Because I wrote, dude can't do anything right. He can't sell the machine. He just ends up like fainting in his own blood in the corner.
Yeah.
He can't convince his wife to come back. He can't even kill her. He tries to shoot her, he can't kill her. He's just constantly failing in every corner. He can't convince anyone of his side of the argument.
Can't even kill himself.
Yeah, can't even kill himself. So exactly. Like he kind of like spits up the water in the last image, so you know he survives. And it's just like, this intellectual guy, despite all of his reading.
I mean, it goes back to what you were saying. Like, can you live all of those ideas, intellectuality, also want a life in this modernity?
Yeah.
Want all the other things that are around, money, survival, a beautiful wife, family, but also be obsessed with that? Or do you need to become Ali Abedini, his mentor and his best friend, give up everything and his family's left him and he's still waiting for them to come back, but he doesn't mind it and he's just living his life and working for the sake of working.
Behind the scenes and trivia, I don't have too much. I have only 2 notes I was able to find on IMDb. So apparently Dariush Mehrjui decided to cast Bita Farahi, the main Farahi, after meeting her at a party.
I'm not surprised,
Mehrtash, you know how it is.
I'm not surprised.
In 1997, Hamoun was voted the best Iranian film ever made by a survey of Iranian film critics. It had replaced The Cow, which is Mehrjui's other film.
Yeah, there you go. All the critics were intellectuals at the time, and they were all like, "Yeah, this is everything that we all been going through." And
this movie gets me, man.
Yeah,
and they were all influenced by the critics at the time, influenced by French New Wave and like the ideas that were like all the French were talking about, and like after the revolution, it's like, I'm not surprised. And I mean, honestly, it's still a good movie. It's still a very important movie. It's still I think it's a big accomplishment, especially at a time for Iranian cinema.
So let's go to critical reactions. I had mentioned the 88% audience score. Why don't you talk about that stuff you mentioned, Mehrtash? The two different reactions from camps of Iranian citizens.
Exactly. So I think it's what I found fascinating is like you can see there's very obvious opposite camps. Some people who really love it, and the thing is like philosophy is very important. It's an important film, and some people who are like, this is just a man kind of jerking off on the screen, with his ideas and everything. Just like, look what I can talk about. And also, I'll read some of them. I think it's a good example. One person is saying an aesthetic and thematic blend between surrealism and traditionalism. This film's overarching theme is centered around the philosophical, moral, and theological grappling of killing the ones dearest to oneself. Goes on and says, while Hamid deals with his wife wanting to divorce him, his mental health deteriorates, and the nature of his dreams and hallucinations serves as a reminder to the viewer that he's slipping into madness. Mehrjui asks to determine what is real and what is a dream. And he also, very importantly, he talks about Mehrjui, male versus female madness is treated very differently in all of Mehrjui's work. Patriarchy, particularly when it comes to the husband versus the wife, female madness is justified, yet nevertheless concerning. Male madness is almost a reaction, drawn from self and self-imposed. Definitely so much more to explore. So it's like very for it. There's another one. It talks about exactly what we were talking about. It's like Hamid Hamoun is the main character. He's exactly the representation of the intellectual of the era, and a symbol of their confusion and their disillusionment and their kind of heartbrokenness of what's going on and trying to make sense of it out of all of that stuff. And then one person just called it like a feverish dream, which I think it's very also true, which is again goes back to Sadegh Hedayat, his book. The ones who are against is fascinating to me. One person is like, just waste of 2 hours of my life. 1 hour, I watched 1 hour of it and I couldn't even bear through the half hour. And he says, once at the first sight, they're trying to make this a very intellectual, serious, with a lot of allegory behind it. But in reality, he thinks he's not deep or intellectual at all. He's like, basically, he just wants to show off all of the books and everything that he's read. It's nothing makes sense. So it's like kind of the public being like, I don't have time for this. Just tell me something that actually matters and I can really think about. And the other one that I find fascinating, some person just says the patriarchy always blames modernity of their fault.
Oh, that's interesting.
I think that was kind of interesting take on it, which I don't necessarily agree, but I can see how that can pan out.
I don't agree with it, but I don't disagree with it either.
I think it's the way of looking at it.
Like, I do think that sometimes people will use it as a crutch.
I think if you don't dig deep into the ideas behind the movie, that's a very easy reaction. Oh, like patriarchy, this man is like, blaming the woman for his madness. But there's definitely other stuff going on.
Yeah.
I just wanted to read a LA Times. This was written in 1990 when the film came out and it got to America. Kevin Thomas, a film critic for the LA Times, wrote, "The film is a study in self-absorption. It's self-tormenting. Self-indulgent hero is so caught up in his sense of failure and frustration in a changing society that he is blind to the fact of his old-fashioned bombastic macho treatment of his wife and is less proud of her success as an artist than he is threatened by it. Hamoun is probably Mehrjui's most stylistically ambitious film. In a sense, Hamoun is Mehrjui's 8.5 or La Dolce Vita, but even more, it is the work of an artist who is his own man, regardless of influences, and who is attempting to come to terms with life in a society riddled with contradictions and uncertainties."
Yeah, I mean, that's perfect.
And the guy loved it. He gave it like a glowing review. Any critical reactions from you, Farhan June?
Like my own personal ones or like things that I found online?
No. You have your own personal ones.
No, the only thing that, like, similar to what Mehrtash said, it's funny looking at some of these, I was scrolling through some of the Letterboxd reviews, how like you'll get ones that are like 5 out of 5, greatest movie I've ever seen. And then there's like a guy who's given it like half a star and just like a wall of text of him like shitting on the movie.
Yeah, this is a total mid-level A24 film. Like an art house horror A24 film that's going to either get 5 stars or like half a star, like those deeper analysis.
I really want to talk about this review by Nima Naderi, who I actually don't know, but I think his reviews were very, very on point. He went a very, very long article to kind of tap into all of it. And
where did you find it? Sorry, just shouting out the source.
This is on an Iranian website, Nima Naderi, Zumek.ir.
Okay.
He talks about how thematically and as a whole, and the way that it tells the story is really similar to Blind Owl by Sadegh Hidayat, who was the intellectual of the time before revolution. Everybody was obsessed with him, and we can have a whole session about like why Sadegh Hidayat was important to Iranian people back then, and it still is. But thematically is similar. That guy is also going through... He does opioid, basically, that guy in the book, and then he goes through his feverish dream and has dreams and philosophy and ideas and everything, which is not dissimilar to this. Basically, thematically, he's taken from that, but then puts his own influences of, like, as you said, Fellini and Bergman and French New Wave, and then kind of putting all of these things together. And this is a guy who studied philosophy and who studied cinema and philosophy and came back to the Iranian society and seeing all this change and midlife crisis that he's going through. So it's the perfect platform for him to make a film like this that tries to answer personal and societal questions. Whether it does it successfully or not, I think that's what the reaction of the public is telling us. Some people hate it, some people really love it, and they think it did. I personally, I'm still in love with this movie. The dialogue, some of the dialogue is incredible. The acting is incredible.
Yeah, I made note of the dialogue too.
Yeah, it's amazing in how he kind of, some of them is obviously over the top, but like once you get into the used to of the idea, this guy's like this philosopher, wannabe philosopher, and he's obsessed with all of this stuff and also trying to make money to satisfy his rich, beautiful wife but he can't. I think one of the important things is like the allegories and the metaphors and the symbolism that he talks about, even that it opens in the water and then finishes there. It also has a lot of metaphors of like in Iranian culture, like water is the purity, especially the seas, like takes away all the guilt and everything that he can do that. And I think it's nothing that he chooses to commit suicide in the water, but also the scene when he comes out at the very end with the fishing net. He comes out almost like a womb, right? He comes out when we know that he's like basically his fetus, and then all of a sudden everything is the way he wants it. Like his wife loves him, he's a successful person, his boss loves him, everything is great, everything is working.
Can I add that also that reminded me of Scorsese's King of Comedy? Have you seen King of Comedy?
Yeah.
Where like the whole point is he constantly thinks that he's gonna make it big and he has dreams of making it big, and then he essentially like holds the talk show host as a hostage, and he's arrested. And at the end is a dream sequence that is either interpreted as a dream sequence or it really happened, because then the last thing is him like becoming a big hit star because of this, and he's got his own talk show and he's a famous comedian, and it's like everything worked out so perfectly for him, but it could just as well be a dream sequence, which I thought of like King of Comedy when I saw that.
I do want to talk about a little bit how the mom, that's the moments when I got emotional for the very first time in the movie.
Why?
When he goes to the grandma and then when he wants to get the gun, and then we see the grandma and we see the sequence, the childhood sequence, first of all, that you see, like every time I see those old houses and the Iranian architecture and the way that they used to live, and now that I look back, even the last time I went to Iran, none of it exists anymore. They all turned them down and they're all apartments, and basically the culture in a way, it's kind of gone. So it makes me emotional just in that personal level. But in the film itself, when he goes to the grandma, even he doesn't want to, just wants to get the gun to go, and he keeps forgetting the gun, obviously, but he's just obsessed with these other ideas that he doesn't even know what he's doing anymore. But then when the grandma asks him, she's all of a sudden comes to his senses. At the beginning we think like she doesn't even remember who she is, but then she comes to his senses, like ask about his kids and how you doing. And for the first time, not for the first time, but like emotionally admits like things are not good. Like she wants to divorce me and everything. And it's the grandma who tells him, you're heartbroken. Like, I feel so sorry for you. You don't have anyone anymore. And I'm heartbroken. You're heartbroken. I'm sad for you. And she starts crying and doesn't want him to leave. Right? That's the moment when I was like, this is for the first time that he's admitting like what is really all of this midlife crisis going on, right? He's lost and heartbroken and just loves this woman. She doesn't love him. That's huge. The way that she talks about him, it's like, I just don't love you anymore. I don't like you anymore. That's not an easy thing to hear, right? It's not out of a sudden like 8 years of love and beauty, because we do see it at the beginning when they have beautiful moments and she's really obsessed with him. She went against her own family to marry him. And all of a sudden she's like, no, I was wrong. My life is not good. We are poor. I'm confused and I don't love you. You are the source of my misery. That's a hard thing to hear. And the grandma, when it goes back to all of the comfort moments that he had with his mom and his siblings and the cousins and the beautiful house as a child, and it's the grandma who's like, you're heartbroken. And the way that she talks about it and her beautiful voice, and then holding on to his hand and he's about to leave and not wanting him to leave. He's like, just to stay a bit longer, and he goes. And that's a moment of collapse, right? That's when he's like getting the gun to kill her, which it just doesn't make any sense really. But to me, that's one of the most emotional portion of the movie, and it kind of summarizes the whole thing for me. I'm like, all these philosophical ideas and allegories beside, he's just a heartbroken man who's going through a hard midlife crisis and doesn't have anyone.
Well, I think with a movie like this, because typically when we do the deeper analysis section, we're like, oh, this one thing that happens in the movie, what do you think it represents? Does it represent this? Does it represent that? I will say with this movie, it's weirdly harder to do it in some ways because the movie tells you. You know what I mean? Like, this guy he'll talk about the Ishmael and Abraham thing. And if he had just brought it up, then it's like, oh, I feel like that's about whether or not he's willing to let his wife go. But then 20 minutes later, the movie spends 10 minutes telling you, yeah, that's what this is about. So it's like, because it's a whole movie that is diving into these philosophical questions and conversations, it's hard for us to dive into what do you think is the subtext here? Because the subtext is discussed on screen.
There you go. Yes. And I think that's the movie. I don't think he wants to be a subtext. He's just like, that's the movie. He's like, listen.
Yeah, I'm going to pose these questions and answer them myself.
All of this. And he tries to answer them.
Right.
And the whole movie becomes an endeavor to answer that question.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It becomes an endeavor to understand these philosophical ideas in a backdrop of a modern society and what modern society wants you to do. You need to be rich. You need to make money. You need to live a life. If you have family, you need to provide for them. You need to do this. But also you want to... So can you still live by the same ideologies that the Greek philosopher was telling you? Really? Can you still live by the ideas that Maulana was telling you to live when he was just traveling all his life without a family? He was in love with Shams at some point. He had a mentor. Basically, Ali Abedini, he's Shams as Shams was to Maulana in a way. And can you still do that? and Ali Abedini is a representation of shams to me.
Yeah,
even if you really want, because
I think
Maulana's
so too.
book comes about, right? Who is just given, he's just living life based on his ideology. He's living in north of Iran, is digging dirt with all the villagers.
Mm-hmm.
He's this intellectual, smart person who's an engineer, but he's just given up. He's like, I'm gonna live life the way that these ideas are telling me. And if my children might have left me, they might come back, they might not. He says one important dialogue there. He's like, yeah, I live in hope,
Yeah.
but also in hopelessness. They might come back, they might not. Who's to say? And he's cracking an egg. And that scene, I think one of the most beautiful scenes in the movie to me, beyond many other beautiful scenes, is when he's looking at, he's in one of the memories that he is with Ali Abedini, his mentor, his Shams, and then that dialogue is, and they had dinner, and then you see this white shot when Ali Abedini is playing sitar in the corner, and Hamoun is going through a book of maps. And then he goes through the history of map of Iran. And then he goes, oh, this is this era. This is that era. And then he gets to Qajar era. It's like, oh, how did the map become so small?
Right, yeah.
And then he goes on. Yeah. And Ali Abedini there is just playing his sitar. He's just being in his Zen mode.
Yeah, that's true. He's not reacting to what he's saying.
No, he's living his life. He's like, I can't answer. And I mean, honestly, not to make this a bit of a personal, I don't know, but I can relate to it. Like living out of Iran for like 12 years now, and being kind of entrenched in Canadian society and wanting to be a filmmaker here, which means that you can't really be attached to your own culture that much or talk about those things or anything. You can't let these things go that easily. The ideas of like, what happens to my country, what's going on, that's something I also wanted to bring about. Difference between Mehrjui and Kiarostami. I appreciate Mehrjui's and Panahi's way, not as filmmakers, but as individual who care about Iran itself, right? Their culture, their tradition, like what happened to it after the revolution, getting destroyed. Kiarostami is not really concerned. No, he's like
photography and poetry.
Yeah, I'm in poetry, photography.
Kiarostami is Ali in this situation.
Iran is going through shit. Yeah. It goes through all this shit. I don't care, whatever. It all goes on. These two shall pass. When Mehrjui is like, yeah, these two shall pass, but like, what about now? Like, I want better things. I find that fascinating, which I think Beizai is somewhere in between. Like Beizai has found his peace, but also he's like, I want to contribute to the culture. I want to preserve the culture. I want to do all of these things.
I was going to reference, because that goes really well to what the Kierkegaard book is, like the Fear and Trembling book. I remember reading that for my modern political thought course at U of T, and I actually copied the book, and then I did some Googling just to remind myself. But yeah, the Kierkegaard book is about faith, ethics, and like the struggle of being human. Like, how difficult is it of being a human when you have to deal with all these like ridiculous elements of like your own faith and the way you manage faith and spirituality. And in it, he uses the Abraham story to talk about what it means to have faith. And that's the thesis that he's working on, right? He says himself, Abraham is killing his own son with his hands. And I'm trying to understand, Hamoun says this, I want to understand why someone would do this. How could someone do this? And what does that say about us?
Yeah.
Because like Abraham is asked by God to sacrifice his own son.
Yeah.
And Kierkegaard in that book frames it as like the ultimate test of faith, even though it's a test of faith that defies logic and it defies ethics and it defines everything that we think we know about being human.
Yeah.
He's like been writing his thesis on this, and he's like, I'm struggling with what it means to be human. Like, what am I supposed to believe in anymore? Like, he's having an existential crisis, essentially.
Just a quick little disclaimer too, just in case people are confused why we keep saying Abraham and Ishmael. In Islamic tradition, Abraham sacrifices Ishmael. In Judeo-Christian tradition, it's a sacrifice of Isaac. So in Fear and Trembling, he's talking about Isaac, and then in this, obviously, they're talking about Ishmael. I just wanted to clarify.
The last thing I wanted to add, though, about the Kierkegaard thing was I found this on the Wikipedia, which I never knew, but I found this really interesting, is that it's sometimes thought that fear and trembling was Kierkegaard's way of explaining or working through his breaking off his engagement with Regine, since this text is said to contain a hidden message. So there's genuinely like this, like in like people who study philosophy on like an academic level, they're like, this is actually about him working through essentially a breakup and a divorce with his love. And that the hidden text behind it, which I did not know at all. But that's just another interesting element to the whole fact that this cool. This is Kierkegaard's breakup like letter, like essays.
I like that.
Ahmad Shamlu has a lot in this as well, right? Ahmad Shamlu, who's like is probably the biggest poet of Iran. It was very influential during revolution and after revolution. Intellectuals really love him, and he does really talk about him in this movie a lot, which they were hanging out together at a time, right? There was a group of intellectuals going to parties, and these are the people you see, and then you hang out. It's like in the 70s going to parties, and you had a Scorsese in there, like, I don't know, you see
Truman Capote,
and then the pop art
it's Andy Warhol.
Andy Warhol is there. Like, you go there and you see all of these people, and you just hang out, and then you make films and you bring their ideas into it.
The other thing I wanted to say from Deeper Analysis, because I quote Hamid Nafisi all the time in our podcast. He's the guy who wrote the 4 volumes of like history of Iranian cinema.
Yeah.
And he wrote a whole chapter on intimacy and the way intimacy is portrayed in Iranian cinema in different movies. And he referenced all of these ways they kind of skirt around it during the Islamic Republic. So this is a unique portrayal of intimacy. He says, Hamoun and his wife go on a religious pilgrimage to save their marriage. Each of them is filmed in extreme close-ups as they lovingly kiss the railings of the imam's mausoleum, as though they are kissing each other. The filming and editing sutures the two loves kissing a common object that symbolically connects them. So it's like they're not kissing each other, but they're kissing like their lips and faces are up against like the mausoleum. But it's like intimate. It's almost like they're connected through that.
In that point, I want to say the contrast that Mehrjui is talking about at a time in that era, right? Because right before that, the scene before that is where they are in the bookstore, exchanging all these books of Western philosophies. And then the scene after that is when they're going to the pilgrimage. They're going to the shrine. When she's wearing a full hijab, she's wearing a chador. I think it's intentional that he chose those two scenes right together. The contrast of like tradition versus modernity, Western ideas versus classical ideas of Islamic nations of Iran, and how those societies are clashed. Mehrjui ideas of God really meant something to him, and the religion and everything. He tried to understand it. It's very important, the juxtaposition of those two scenes together.
The very last thing I want to add to is the Franny and Zoe J.D. Salinger references. Because in that, it's a story about a woman who's like, she's feeling alienated with how superficial her environment, and pursues a spiritual or philosophical awakening. So like that story is also about like the critique of intellectualism and ego and being frustrated with your surroundings. And then their sibling offers them an opportunity to like look into God for answers and look to spirituality for answers. So like in a lot of ways, this is very similar thematic things to Franny and Zoe too, which is why he was so obsessed with showing close-ups of that book being in his hands. Okay, let's go. Best scene. My favorite scene, one of them, there's a lot of great scenes, but I really liked the dream sequence in which he kind of descends down the stairs to find them operating on himself. All the people are operating on him, right? Lying there. Everyone he knows is like a doctor. What I especially liked at the end was when he walks into another room at the end of that sequence and he sees himself sitting there having like tea or lunch with someone, and it's a woman in a chador. And you finally reveal the woman's face, and it's like a blank, like egg face. I was like, that's really creepy and like really interesting, and I really liked that. That was my favorite dream sequence.
Yeah, I like the visual.
I'll put that up there.
That was a good one. My favorite scene is towards the end of the movie when he's like digging the hole on the beach to like take his own life and like bury himself in, essentially.
Yeah.
And then the guy comes over and he's like, "What the hell are you doing?" Like, what do you mean? He's like, what do you care if I'm like digging up a grave for myself? He's like, this is my property. Like, and they get into a whole fight over it. And this guy's like, look, I don't care what you do or where you do it. You can't do it on my property. And I was just like, it's like the height of like, it comes back to that thing of like everything this guy tries to do, he can't do it right. Like, including this, where you would think that he like has some agency over his own life. Like even there, he's like failing at it.
Yeah. Mehrtash, do you have a favorite scene?
The sequence when showing the midlife crisis of Mashid, his wife as well, right? there's a sequence in like 33 minutes when we see her painting and then learning to play sitar, and then he's designing and talks about how she doesn't know what he's doing. And I think that's a perfect representation of the small moments in the film when you can actually talk about the bigger concept that you're really behind it. And another idea is like when his boss is talking about, look at all you're stuck in your old ways of traditions and ideas. Look at Malaysia, Indonesia, the world is going forward and you're stuck in that era. It's basically another jab at the intellectuals at the time and what's happening in Iran right at the time, right? It's like the world is going forward. We did a revolution based on ideology and we f***ed up while the rest of the world is like still going. And then what are we stuck at the time?
They're doing the rest of the world's doing a revolution on technology. We're doing it on ideology.
And we're getting nowhere.
I want to quickly mention one thing, Mehrtash, that you were talking about when you said like when she was playing the tar. Do you remember what song she was playing?
Yeah.
Morgha Sahar, which is all about it's like obviously it's a revolutionary song. But it's also about a bird who's like trapped in a cage and trying to
free himself.
Yeah.
No, it's important.
I like that was the song used because in some ways you could apply that to Hamoun, but you can also apply it to his wife.
Okay, let's go to Damn That's Poetry. Mehrtash, you said there was quotes that you talked a lot about in the schoolyard. That were tell us about that.
The most memorable one is when he says, "You want me to be the one that you want me to be, but if I'm the one that you want me to be, then it's not the one who is me. I mean, it's not the true me."
تو میخوای من اونی باشم که واقعا خودت میخوای من باشم؟ اگه اونی باشم که تو میخوای وقت دیگه من نیست. یعنی من خودم نیستم.
Nice.
I think that's one of like memorable dialogues.
Mine is when the wife is talking about the first time they got into an argument and he hits her.
Mm-hmm.
The counselor responds, "This is just the way for men in Iran. They oppress and they have been oppressed. This has become second nature to them."
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's like scathing commentary on
like they've been patriarchal for
patriarchy.
so long that they just don't know how else to behave.
Yeah.
So it's criticizing themselves as men, really, which is, I think it's a very important thing to acknowledge.
Which I don't agree that it should be embedded in there, but like that is like the insinuation that the doctor is giving.
My favorite quote came early on, but he's like getting mad at the therapist when they're going down the stairs and he's trying to figure out what they're talking about and stuff.
That's good.
And he's like, what do you talk about? How important my parents are? Fine. My mother died very early and my father was a conservative moron, but I'm the complete opposite. I knock around. I don't get anywhere. I'm sinking. I don't trust anyone. I don't believe in anything. What does it mean? I'm a nobody. I'm over 40 and I'm still just hanging around. And then he says to him right after he goes, "Where to on this dark night shall we hang our torn and rotten cloaks?"
چی میخوای؟ پدر مادر جد آباد اگه مطرحه من مادرم پلیس بود رفت و پدرم هم انقدر ساده بود که آسیبی رفت آسیبی من توی گربه شاقش نزنه ولی من درست ضد بابامم. من مرتب شیلک تختی می‌نویسم ولی به جایی نمیرسم دکتر. دارم فرو میرم. من دیگه به هیچی اعتماد ندارم. به هیچی اعتقاد ندارم. دارم خطر میرم. یعنی چی؟ من یه موقعی فکر می‌کردم یک گوی میشم ولی هیچ مخی نشدم. 40 خورده ازم گذشته بدتر آویزونم. آویزون. چیکار کنم؟ آویخته ها. به کجا این شب تیره بیاویزیم قبای جنده بود کپک سره خودم شد.
Which is the poem that my mom told me is by Nima Yushij.
Yeah.
And she said that's like a very famous poet. I actually didn't know him. I'm embarrassed to say. I'm more like, I know my Sohrab Seperi better, but like this was a Nima Yushij quote that my mom said is very famous quote. "Where to on this dark night shall we hang our torn and rotten cloaks?" We'll insert the clip here so you can hear that whole section. He says it all together at once.
Mm-hmm.
But I really liked that. I thought it was a beautiful moment, and it was my favorite.
And all in while, this guy is just trying to go to the washroom. And that scene ends when this guy goes to the toilet.
Yeah, I noticed that.
That's true. That's really funny, actually. The guy just wants to take a shit.
Yeah.
He's like following him to the washroom.
Yeah. And you think, because the whole time the therapist is like, yeah, it's a great question.
Just go wait there. I'll come talk to you.
Yeah. And
then while he's like walking away, he's like saying this quote to himself.
Yeah, it's a beautiful quote.
See, that was the thing where I was like, yo, this movie is all about the intelligentsia and how it loves the smell of its own farts.
Right, yeah.
Like, there's no one there to listen to him anymore, and he's still just going off, like, grumbling quotes to himself.
And he's criticizing themselves. Like,
Oh,
that's what I love
100%.
about it. He's like,
100%.
look at us. We're thinking we are the smartest people on earth, yet we can't even live.
Ironically, I will say, again, my, like, number one issue with this movie is how overly wordy it can be sometimes. So it's like, while it's being critical of the intelligentsia for being so, like, self-absorbed, is almost being too wordy with it as well.
Yeah.
So it's like being too scholarly about being
defeats his own
scholarly.
purpose. Yeah. By the virtue of trying to criticize them, he's being too over righteous. Yeah.
Favorite performance? I actually want to give it to Bita Farahi, who played Mashid, his wife. I thought she was really good. Really liked it. Her performance.
I mean, mine is obvious. I said it multiple times. I think Khosrow Shakibai just hands down wins it for me. It's just
same.
He's one of the masters performances of Iranian cinema in this
Yeah,
film. I
no,
think.
he's very good too.
I'll give a special shout out, honorable mention to Izzatullah Intizami.
Oh, he's always
Yeah.
good.
His face has changed a lot from like this to the cow. Like, he looks like a totally different person.
Yeah. You guys should watch Neighbors.
Watch Our Neighbors.
Isn't that Tenants?
Tenants, sorry, yes.
Tenants,
Tenants. Yeah, it's very good. Azatollah
I've seen
Intizami
it.
kills it in that one.
Yeah, I've seen it. It's really hard to find a good quality version of that. I watched a terrible VHS rip.
Yeah.
Like almost unwatchable.
Time for someone to kind of restore all of his films.
Well, okay, there. Now let's go straight to Festival of Cons. Because my biggest con, aside from the stuff we've already talked about, how this movie's a little heady, is I actually wish some distributor had made a clearer version of this movie. Like, I'm surprised Janus or Criterion has not taken the film that was voted at one point the best Iranian film of all time to give it some attention and do a better, cleaner version of this movie.
Yeah.
I mean, the masters are probably under lock and key now.
Where? With whom?
Like in Iran.
Maybe. It's a shame.
Yeah.
Like, this is probably a film that's going to be, like, standing the test of time in terms of introspection and studying and academia
Yeah.
and like, you know, it's just that the best quality version is probably the one we saw, which is not great.
Yeah. I mean, the video wasn't bad, but the audio was terrible.
Audio was really bad.
Like, especially in the first half, there were full scenes where, like, you can't really hear what's going on.
I had the volume cranked up to 100.
Yeah, I was, like, trying to use context clues to, like, figure out what was going on in scenes. I was able to figure out what was happening in the earlier part of the movie because in the later parts of the movie, the sound was better.
Any cons for you too?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a little bit of too much stuff kind of packed into it. I think the narrative could have, even though it's not linear, you know, storytelling. It's meant to be in a certain way, but I think, yeah, if took away some of the things, I think it would have been a stronger film for me.
Yeah, I agree. I'll also throw in, like, I feel like the non-linear style would have actually hit even harder for me if the movie had removed all of the narration. Because I also felt like the narration was, like, it wasn't frequent enough to feel like it was, like, a constant motif in the film either, or, like, a constant, like, mechanism. Like, I would forget that there was a narration and then all of a sudden it would show up. It almost felt like the movie wasn't meant to have a narration, and while they were watching the cut, they were worried that the audience would be confused by, like, the dream sequences. So then all of a sudden there's, like, bits of the movie where a narrator will be like, the other night I had this dream, and then it shows the dream and I'm like, I didn't need that. Like, all you've done is take me out of the movie now. I also feel like there's an argument to be made that he should have stayed dead at the end.
Well, I think it's funnier that he survives. He can't even do that. Like, he fails
Yeah.
at even that.
I know, I said the same thing too, but I'm like, I feel like it might have been a stronger ending if he stayed dead and his friend still finds his body.
There were I think for me, there was 3 different endings, honestly. Like, I think the one that when he goes to the sea, just suicide, that could be just the ending.
Yeah.
Then when they find him in the dream, when he comes out from the fishing net, that could have been a nice ending when he's like dying moments. And then every time I think about it, I think at the end of it is still justified for me because he just wanted to say those things. It's just you add another word into finishing a sentence, and by each word you kind of changing what you're saying, and I think it's justified.
That's fair.
Double feature lineup. If we were going to pair this for a theater with another film, what would we pick? I'll go first. Obviously the 8.5 Fellini reference, that would be a very nice pairing. But I also kept thinking about Marriage Story, the Noah Baumbach film.
I had that on my list too.
Even because they literally jump around timeline. There's a movie also called Blue Valentine.
Yeah.
Starring Ryan Gosling that also does this. So I thought there's quite a few like stories about a slow marriage breaking down where we jump around the timeline of the happy moments and bad. That if you wanted to do like a divorce double feature failed marriage night, you could take any of those movies. So Marriage Story, Blue Valentine, or 8.5.
Yeah.
Any of those would be great.
It's funny, I had both Blue Valentine and Marriage Story on here.
Yeah.
I'm leaning towards the Separation though.
Oh, interesting.
Because I think that Separation is like a nice modern like evolution of this movie. Because in a Separation, the husband is a little more understanding, but he's still flexing the patriarchy and he's still using it as a weapon. You know what I mean?
How? Why is he using it as a weapon?
Because he's like, I'm not letting you take my daughter.
Oh.
As like the man. He can be like, look, fine, you can get a divorce, but I'm keeping my daughter. Right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a jab at the patriarchal regime.
Yeah. So I think Separation would probably be the one I would go with.
I'm gonna lean towards its philosophy and poeticness of it a little bit.
Yeah.
We talked about it with Kava one time, I think. Eternity and a Day, which is by Todoros Angelopoulos, which is this Greek director. 1998, I think he made that film. That's won the Cannes. So I actually watched it for the first time like six years ago, 4 years ago. It's similar. It's like an old writer who's dying of cancer, and then he just the flashback sequence of his childhood, his dead wife, and what it means to be alive.
And it's like very philosophical, just like this too.
Very philosophical, just like this, and it tells it in a very poetic way. And the music in that film is fantastic, and it's just sequences that they're just allegories of what you feel through. I think it would be a very slow pairing. Both movies, you need a break between the two, but I think they would be beautifully matched.
Can this be a modern Hollywood remake? I actually think no. I think the best thing that Hollywood could do for this movie is restore this version to like prime great quality with good sound. I think it would lose all of its point and substance to be modern remake.
Yeah. Also, maybe throw in an editor's cut. That's like someone goes in and just trims off a little bit of the fat.
So it's nose all around for modern remake, right?
Yeah, you don't need it.
If I had to be like, if somebody has to make a modern remake, I think like Aronofsky back in the days when he used to make like philosophical thrillers, I think he could turn
like
this
the
into
Fountain
a good
version of the Aronofsky.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, then you could lean in heavy into some of the like the hallucination dream sequences and stuff would be fun.
Yeah, even Swan.
What'd you say?
Black Swan by Aronofsky. I think.
Yeah.
He could in that genre. I think he would do a great job at it.
Even weirdly, like Alex Garland.
Yeah.
Too.
Well, yeah, it would make it super horror. But
yeah, the dream sequences though.
Don't give this movie to Christopher Nolan. It would go from
be an epic adventure.
2 hours to 3 hours just by like how much more dialogue he would pack in.
All right, final thoughts and grades. I think I give this a high B, thinking that it's an A if I watch it 2 more times. Like, I think every time I watch it would get a higher and higher grade.
What is that, a B, a B plus, or a B plus?
I think a B plus. And I think if I watched it again, it'd be an A minus. And if I watched it a third time, I'd probably consider it an A. But right now, as it stands, with the amount of research I still have to do to understand the film, I give it a B plus.
That's higher than I thought you'd give it. I'm not gonna lie.
Mehrtash, June.
So I'll give it like B plus.
Okay, yeah, B plus. Yeah, same.
A minus or B plus? Yeah, A minus. A double
A minus or A minus?
A minus.
A minus.
A minus, okay.
Because of, honestly, I think I said it at the beginning, the concept, the daringness of a filmmaker doing that, and because it still holds up and it is a cult classic, it's such an influential film. And if you watch it again and again, every time you find little nitbits in it and beauty in it and little things that you didn't pick up last time. And I think by each decade of your life, you need to watch this movie, and each decade you will have a different feeling about it. So I'm excited to watch it in 10 years and be like, I should divorce my wife immediately.
Fine, June.
I think overall the movie was overwritten. It was too long. I think there's a really good movie in here, but I think it requires a lot of like chiseling away. It feels like someone took a marble slab, started to make a statue out of it, and I can like see something in it that's really good, but I think it needs more work and more chipping away.
Well, maybe it's an abstract statue.
Maybe. I think the cow gave the audience more opportunity to think for itself and showed more than it told. Whereas this movie, I felt, didn't do it as much. I also thought the cinematography in something like The Cow was incredibly stunning, but this felt more like it was like a TV movie, like in terms of cinematography. So I was like pretty disappointed, I'm not going to lie, in the end. But I think overall, the movie gets a C+ out of me. And I think that there is a version where someone could recut this, and I would probably give it an A+.
Okay. It's also important to point out that The Cow was written, it wasn't by him. He basically adapted Azodaron Bayal.
Yeah, that's right. Mourners of Bayal.
Yeah, by Saidi, Ghulam Hussain Saidi. So maybe that's something to tell about the story in a way.
That's fair. So overall, that means that the Cinema Rex average score for this is a B.
I'm okay with that.
What happens when a dream is over and one is forced to live a difficult life? Dariush Mehrjui can be regarded as one of the most intellectually mature directors in the history of Iranian cinema. This maturity stems from his profound engagement with philosophy, which not only shaped his artistic vision, but also earned him an international acclaim well before other celebrated Iranian filmmakers such as Kiarostami, Makhmalbaf. His early masterpiece, Gov, was long considered one of the greatest Iranian films, though it was later surpassed by his 1990 work Hamoun, which has since been hailed as the best Iranian film of all time. Hamoun stands as a deeply complex intellectual angst drama, exploring the fractured lives of an Iranian intellectual couple unable to reconcile their personal and philosophical differences. The film serves as a poignant critique of the intellectual class, highlighting both their existential struggles and, as Mehrjui portrays with sharp precision, their capacity to be great failures in their pursuits, often exacerbating the very challenges they aim to overcome. It is this layered portrayal of intellectual turmoil and human frailty that cements Hamoun as one of the defining works of Iranian cinema. Mehrtash, thank you so much for joining us in today's episode.
Thank you, Mehrtash.
Thank you guys for having me. It's always a pleasure. It's really fun to do these things, and thank you for making me watch Hamoun again after all these years. I really enjoyed it, and yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for recommending this movie, Mehrtash.
Yeah, anytime.
Farhan June, thank you as always.
Thank you.
You know how I feel about you.
Unfortunately.
To all our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Be Omid Didar.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, remember to like, comment, subscribe, all the things. Music for Cinema Rex was written and performed by Sohail Sadinejad.